see you with MCP. When I'm pausing the JSON and connecting to stream, cause you got to know what my code overlooks. Your rate limit throttles will start when it's waiting replies, and you can't escape my APIs. We're calling you, authenticate every tool. APIs, connecting you. APIs, connecting you, calling you, routing you to our tools. You get with Claude, you post and spot. Integrations abound, webhooks, that is the stuff. Cause grok, I'm in the flow, and you're locking me in. Payloads go to and fro, authorized with my endpoints applied, and I can't stop my APIs.
Emulate the taste of like non-chicken nuggets. So these nuggets are made from chicken, but they're made to emulate the taste of non-chicken nuggets. Dope.
Oh, that's much better.
Edit all the blather out of your videos because my time is very precious.
Oh, that's fire.
Make it less teal and more
Cerulean? Sure.
Replace your background with something more fun? The cold void of outer space.
Let's boost that sound quality. Emulate the taste of non-chicken nuggets. Emulate the taste of non-chicken nuggets. Dope.
It needs more style, it needs more clips, more GIFs, more. Well, I might have made it too gnarly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. God, it's the hot energy high I'm coming off of that video is, whew. I'm Sam Drezen. I'm joined by Teddy Clegg. We're here for our second episode of this API webinar series. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff, but the thrust of what we're here to talk about today is automating content workflows. But before we jump into it, Teddy, hello. How are you?
Hello. I'm good. It's a relatively cooler day here in the Bay Area after a few hot summer days. So I'm ready and excited to talk about API.
Yes, nothing like summer to shake the APIs out of your closet and take them straight to the beach. For those who didn't tune in last week, Teddy and I hosted a webinar where we talked all about taking the desire for a video that you'd want to create at scale. In our example, we talked about social clips. We had a long form recording of interviews from our CEO, and we wanted to create social clips from those recordings so that we could repurpose them and put them on our socials. But the problem that we solved last week was taking that long form recording and turning it into those clips, but not by manually editing it. We use the MCV, the Descript MCV, basically driving Descript from Claude or ChatGPT to make those edits. And more importantly, once those edits were made, we turned that editing routine, that process, into a skill. And think of a skill as basically just encapsulated instructions to replicate a certain set of edits. So if you want to know more about how we did that and the steps that we took, you should go watch week one's episode. But today, we're going to build on that skill that we created and turn it into an automation. I'm going to jump into the slides now because I want to set the table a little bit more. Today this webinar is going to cover basically what it would look like to stand up your very first automation. And by automation, what I mean is it was really cool that we used Claude to create clips in Descript. It was fun. It was great. We loved the video output. But the end goal here isn't necessarily to just use tools from afar, right? Like using, it's fun that you can do everything from Claude, right? It's really great and really interesting. But the promise here and the end goal, one of the things that we believe the Descript MCP and API are going to unlock for companies and teams and people is giving them the ability to create content at scale. And the most efficient path to that, we believe, is giving people levers to automate certain processes so that a human doesn't have to trigger every single recording, opening up every new project, creating every single clip. So if you're at all automation curious and you've got big content ambitions, today's episode is for you. You're going to walk away with knowing how to spot an automatable content workflow. Basically, like, oh, I have this. I wish I had these clips. I wish I had these videos. I wish I had this workflow. You'll be able to know what makes for a good workflow worth automating. And then we're actually going to show you not one, but 2 ways to set up a basic automation pipeline using 2 different tools. And hopefully one of those fits your bill. They're far from the only, but we'll just pick 2 that feel very basic and approachable. So yeah, we'll jump into it. We'll start with where automation pays off. We'll talk about the basics of what I like to think of as an automation recipe. Then we'll get to the demos already, and hopefully have plenty of time for Q&A. We've got friends and support in the background and behind the scenes monitoring the chat. If you've got questions, if you want to see things, if you love, if you had a really delicious lunch and you want to share what you have with us so we can be jealous, put that in the chat, and we'll make sure to get to your questions and be jealous of your lunch. So where automation pays off. Okay, sorry, this slide is an eye chart, but maybe it's obvious. And Teddy, tell me if you've got any color commentary or thoughts on this. But I figured it was worth starting by saying, every type of content doesn't make sense to automate. Automation is just like in general, it's like a great thing to set up when you have a lot of the same sort of thing that you want to make. Like the analog here is like an assembly line. You wouldn't have an assembly line that makes like one widget, each widget different than the next over and over. It wouldn't be efficient. It wouldn't make any sense. And those same sort of like laws of physics, I guess, apply to the sort of content type of automations you'd want to create. So if you think about all of the sorts of videos that you would make or media processing quests you would go on, the sort of things you want to automate tend to be things like when there's a content type that you'd want to create at scale. In last week's example, and what we'll continue with today, is our CEO does tons of podcast spots and interviews. Every single one of them, it would be great if we could create clips from those interviews and use those different clips across our social posts. So this isn't like a one-time thing. We'd want to create clips every single time she's on a particular podcast or runs a webinar. The second, and this is probably the most important thing, is that the content you create is going to be best if it's highly structured. The format of it is consistent time and again. If the input media you're using is consistent and structured to some degree. If every single video you want to make differs in some very substantive way, where the sorts of editing decisions you make would be different. That would be like, again, an assembly line that makes vastly different products in one shots. It's not the right way to think about automation. And then generally, the state of AI edits and Underlord are quite good. If you don't know what Underlord is, it's our in-app AI co-editor. Basically, think of it like an agent inside Descript you can chat with and it can execute edits. It's great. It's definitely grown and gotten better over time, but still think of it like an overeager editing intern who can do anything you ask and probably has skills you don't have, but still maybe lacks the creative inspiration or direction, right? Like there still should be, still need to create great instructions for the sorts of videos, the sort of content that you want. But if you can describe it with great instructions, then any skilled junior editor or intern, if they could execute the sort of edits with the instructions you give, then that's probably something that's going to be well executed in an automation. And just to the reciprocal of that is, if you've got one-off projects, of course don't automate something for that. If you've got extremely high craft, if you're submitting this film to Sundance, or you want to do something very fancy and very bespoke, probably not a great candidate for automation. Teddy, any thoughts on those? Any other qualifiers or things that you think make for a good scenario to automate content creation versus not?
No, I think you covered it, but I really want to echo what you said around that automation is best for scenarios where we're trying to, move the wheel of editing, but not necessarily get into the craft of it. So automation is great for kind of the mundane tasks, like get bulk batch cutting things. Like if I'm a podcaster who knows I always want to insert my ad roll at 2 minutes into my podcast, or my intro tape at the very beginning. That's a task that's great for automation because it's basically almost like a mathematical formula that I just plug in the inputs, and then Claude or Zapier or whatever I'm using then runs the formula for me. But anything that requires actual artistry or thought around, does this layout look better or that one? Do I want to have this scene first or that one? That's the kind of thing where the human touch is still really beneficial. And what automation does is it takes the weight of the mundane and the menial tasks off your plate so that you can spend more time on the high craft and the artistry of editing.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that last point, Teddy. Like, I don't know if you're paying attention to the shape of the world and the way that AI is shaking things up. I think it's easy to look at a lot of these tools and think like AI is taking my job, and like so too might it for creative work like this. It's not how we feel at Descript. AI tools help to replicate the rote. Like, I would actually push back a bit. I think AI will excel at doing the mundane, the simple, the grunt work. But I think we showed last week that if you refine and edit and iterate on, say, a prompt or an set of instructions that specify what you want, you can actually get Underlord to do pretty meaningfully complex visual edits and media assembly tasks. You just have to give it very explicit instructions, and it needs to be replicable, right? Like, the benefit of going through this whole quest of creating a skill and turning it into an automation is if you intend to do it a lot. So I think, definitely replicability and when you give explicit instructions, AI is great at doing those sorts of tasks. But if humans and even if you have a really great prompt, I think we still expect for humans to be in the loop, right?
Yes. Yeah.
There might be scenarios one day in the world where you just, you've got a content machine, you don't touch, it goes, it posts, and the world is drenched in slop and we all die a miserable death. But until that point, we expect humans to continuously refine. And I think the scenario we'll show today illustrates why humans in the loop make sense. It's just that instead of a human starting the entire process, the first time a human will touch a social clip in our workflow, it will be once the clip is already made, and they can review it and see if we're publishing.
Exactly. It's almost like, I almost think about it, it's like buying a boxed cake mix in a way. That automation lets you create the boxes of cake mix, but then somebody still has to bake the cake. And when you're baking the cake, you can zhuzh it up however you want. You can throw chocolate chips into your funfetti cake if you want. You can get those frosting rosettes if you don't want to just smear on the frosting from the jar, That's up to you still. But automation makes it easier for you to just pick something up off the shelf and then take it wherever you want to go.
Man, I'm talking about food during a lunchtime session is really torturing me here. To illustrate, I think, some examples of workflows that feel like they're good automation candidates, and these may resonate with your team and your content needs. Creating social clips from every webinar, that's the example we're going to do today. Creating demo recaps from every sales call. If your sales executives talk to a bunch of customers and you want to turn each call into a recap that they can send. Generating a video from every blog post is another example I can show. Remember, what Descript is capable of, and this webinar isn't going to go into the full breadth of it. It isn't just taking media and cutting it down and editing it, but with Underlord and a bunch of our generative media tools, you can create images and videos and sound effects and music so that you can take things that aren't video and create videos from them. And all of that, anything that you can do with Descript and Underlord is all able to be packaged and built into a workflow like this. So we listed some other examples, but these are far from comprehensive. These are just, they try to give you real world examples of scenarios where a content automation system might make sense. Okay, so again, this is probably not like groundbreaking, but I just figured it was like helpful to create a framework. The basic recipe for any automation, at least the ones we'll walk through today, are there's going to be some trigger. That's like the thing that kicks off the automation. There's going to be some processing. Basically, we're going to use the skill we created in episode 1 to take a long form podcast and find and edit social clips from it. And you can do other things here in that processing that you want. But then there's an output phase, which basically says when it's done, what should happen. And in the next slide, I listed some different examples of potential triggers, processes, and outputs. But I think really what I want to focus on is like, what are we going to build today? So before we jump in, quickly, a comment on tools. You can automate with a bunch of different tools. There's like more than there needs to be. We're going to focus on 2 today. I think they're the most approachable, although each has their own limitations and caveats. We're going to focus on building a Claude scheduled task, and then Teddy will walk us through building a Zap with Zapier. There are pros and cons to each, but we'll get into them when we start to show the demos. Okay, so what are we doing today? Today, we're going to build an automation that generates clips from podcasts, from long-form podcasts, and we're going to share those clips with our team so that we can review them, pick the ones we like, review them, maybe make some tweaks, and then post them to our socials. That was the scenario we set up last week, and it's what we're going to continue with. But importantly, the first time a human even opens Descript, it will be after the clips have already been made and they're ready to review. And that's the real time savings. The scenario we painted last week was like, hey, we're busy. We got a lot of stuff to do. we love more thought leadership content to drive brand awareness on our socials, but we don't have time to make these videos. Well, we're continuing along that quest to build a machine to generate these clips so that all we need to do is review and then post. The trigger that we'll start with is going to be a recording landing in a specific, what I'll call like a watch folder. If you're not familiar with this concept, we can basically set up our automation to look at a folder. And when a recording lands there, that's what kicks off this entire process. I'll talk later about some other triggers that we could explore that might not make sense or might not work for you, but that's the one we're going to use today. It's probably the simplest one to set up. And then our processing will be straightforward. We'll take the recording, we'll upload it into Descript. We'll use the create clips skill that we created last week. Again, episode 1 has that full coverage. And then the output, when it's all done, we'll ping Teddy and our Slack channel, and we'll get a notification that we can click and open the project to review the clips.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there are any questions or like good priming things we should talk about before we jump into the demo. But if there aren't, then we can jump into the demo. What do you think, Teddy?
Let's get to it.
Let's do it. Now, last week we got feedback that when like AI takes some time to process sometimes. And so what I don't want to do is like, gloss over the hairy details. But a lot of times these are just like easiest demos to show a prompt that I've already run. So that's what I'm going to do here. And then I'm going to jump immediately to show you the output of what was created. So I'm going to be using Claude. It's the tool that I'm comfortable with. You could do this same sort of thing in ChatGPT if you wanted. I opened a Claude Cowork session, and Cowork is specifically the tool that I'm using because Claude Cowork lets you access more of your like operating system's files. Maybe you could achieve the same sort of thing in chat, but I'm going to use Cowork, and I'd recommend if you wanted to replicate this, so do you. And I'll TLDR the prompt for you. Basically, the prompt was, I want to create a scheduled task that triggers new recordings when they pop up in this folder. It creates a new Descript project and applies these edits, and then slacks me when it's all said and done. And what I did with this prompt was I also attached that skill, that like prompt that we created in episode 1 as the basically like what to do with these recordings. I think I mentioned Descript basically, upload the video to Descript with a new project, adding it to a composition. This prompt is just me talking at Claude, explaining what I wanted. I think you could probably get away with a whole lot less verbosity. But if you're still listening 18 minutes into this webinar, verbosity is my my strong suit. But like, I don't think it matters terribly that you copy this particular prompt. But what you should know is I am asking Claude to make a scheduled task. That is the term that describes this primitive that Claude has, which basically lets you trigger a set of instructions at some cadence. In this case, I'm going to be using it. I'll show you how the mechanics are set up basically. So I gave it this prompt. I attached my skill from last week. And at the end, I was like, hey, is this possible? Can you like walk me through how to do this? And it said, yes, very doable with a caveat. So scheduled tasks run on some sort of cadence in Claude. So right now I just have, I'm going to have this thing set. There's a folder that I will point the scheduled task to. It's where all of the new podcast recordings will go to. And then every day, the Claude scheduled task will look and see if there are any new recordings that have been added. And once it finds new recordings, it will import them into Descript, use the attached prompt that I gave to create the clips, and then it will ping us in Slack when the thing is done. And I'll show you here, just like basically, talks through its steps. It indicates all the different Descript operations it will do to import media. It will add compositions for every new clip, so on and so forth. And I don't mean to just like show you this like long and boring prompt, Claude prompt. What I'd rather do is show you what happened when I tested this thing for the first time. And in fact, I actually had this trigger I have it trigger at noon every day, and I did put another recording in so we can actually see if it works. Once you create a scheduled task, they sort of appear in this like scheduled section here. If I go here, you can see all my different scheduled tasks. Let me open this one up, and you can see all of the different runs that were here. If I go to this very first one here, this is when I first set up the scheduled task. You can see this is basically just showing what happened as the scheduled task ran for the first time. One thing I'll note is you might want to run this thing manually yourself. I think you can go, and when you like go into the scheduled task, you can say like run now. Oh, let me get this out here. Run now. And sometimes every operation that Claude needs to do, sometimes it might ask for approval, and you can like in the chat say like approve, allow to run every single time. It's not a bad idea to just run it manually for the first time. But if I show you, this thing basically found a file. It the way that it's going to dedupe not making clips for the same files every time is it added a separate processed folder within the watch folder that I created. And every time it makes clips from one of like a recording it finds, it just moves that file it already made clips from into the processed folder so that any new recordings that are added don't get mixed between ones it's already created clips from. And yeah, it created the clips. It created share pages for each one of those clips. And let me switch tabs right now so I can actually show you what the clips were that it made. Now, again, if you tuned in last week, you will have seen the process that we took to refine the prompt and get things into a state where we were happy with the final output. And let me see, it's good for the soul. Okay, I will share my tab and audio, and I'll shut my mouth so you can actually hear and see what the clip looks like.
It's great. So obviously I've never...
Let me play from the beginning.
Is being the CEO like being the president? I've come to like being the CEO is like being a priest. And I went to Catholic school as a child from kindergarten through 6th grade. So obviously I've never been a priest, but I learned a lot about the call one feels, the vocation, and what the life of a priest is. And the reason why I say that it's like being a priest, and I hope I don't offend anyone, it's meant in kinship, is that one of the things that I learned is the Catholic priests don't marry. And the reason is that they are supposed to be married to the church. And that this concept of the church is actually like what comes first. Obviously, priests are community leaders. They have a bunch of constituents. But ultimately, there is this concept of the church that they are married to and that they have this obligation to. And it's not a job, it's a vocation.
So if you remember the clips that we made last week, that looks very structured and very similar. We even use the same music, the same logos, all that I specified. And just to prove to you that I'm not totally full of it, this is the project that got created as a result of this scheduled task. The original source file is here, and then 3 clips, each of which were created on different topics in the project. Now, if I zoom out, and Teddy, hold me accountable here. If you were watching this video and you wanted to like learn how to automate something, I feel like what I just did was say like, go to Claude, ask to create a scheduled task, give it basic instructions. And like, yes, that is kind of like the premise of it here. What we aren't going into terrible depth on, and what we talked a little bit more about last week, was the fact that we connected Descript to Claude, the formal MCP connector. Go back to watch week 1's episode if you want more instructions on how to do that. And doing that gives Claude the knowledge and ability to talk to Descript and know how to create projects and know how to import media and apply edits with Underlord. We glossed over that here, but because that was already set up, it was as simple as saying, here's a folder. When I add new recordings, follow this process, create a new project, upload the media, apply these edits, and ping me. I didn't even show my Slack notification, but I can show it, but let me just prove it to you that. While I pull that up, Teddy, any reactions, any other things that I might have missed that you think are worth mentioning?
I just want to call out a few questions we had fly by in the chat. So one was, why bother with the Claude business, if I could just record in Descript? And, first I want to say, yes, as someone who works at Descript and works on their recording tools specifically, I think you should be recording everything in Descript all the time. But, sometimes that's not where we record things. Sometimes Laura, for example, goes to other people's podcasts and they have their own recording setup, or we record things in a formal studio. And so the benefit of Claude is that it's that connective tissue so that, for example, when we get the press kit from Laura's interviews and we have a big folder full of long, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 3-hour long files, we can store that anywhere we want. We could upload it Descript. We could put it in Google Drive. We could put it in Dropbox. We could have it on a local folder on our computer with Claude Cowork. And Claude can find it all and still run our scheduled task for us. So I think that's part of what we're really trying to get at through these sessions, is that the beauty of the MCP is it enables Descript to come to you wherever you are and wherever your files are.
Yeah, and Descript has no, like if you go to Descript, the web app or the desktop app, there's no automation functions in there. You can do anything and everything you want in Descript. The rub is that you have to open Descript to do it. And for people who have content needs that are, a content backlog you're never going to get to. Those like videos you are way less important than the things your like video team is already working on. What we're trying to show are that there are tools that you can build systems to make this video pipeline come to life and not need to be the human clicking the thing every single time triggering it.
Can it, and now this question from People Prod Boulder, can it only use one input video, or can it look across several different videos to create an edit? It can look across several different videos to create an edit. And one of the things that's actually kind of magical about using Claude versus Underlord in-app is Underlord in-app is in your specific project and does have access to things like your media library. But in Claude through our MCP can actually look at all your projects. Claude can look at all your projects. It can look at your media library and your brand studio. So if you're like, hey, I initially uploaded this video but I realized I want to pull in this other clip from a podcast interview I did last week because I think it'll splice in really nicely, you can just tell Claude to like find it. And you don't even need to remember specifically what it's called, or you can just give Claude something general. Like, I did a podcast interview last week in a Descript project. It was probably like Monday or Tuesday, and the video was about this. Can you find my video and add it and bring it into here seamlessly?
Yeah, and to echo Teddy's point, to add to it, the tools behind the demos that we're showing is basically the Descript API, which is a set of like commands and tools that you can use to import media, edit that media, publish it, and then there's other stuff that you can do. But those are the main three. And the import API, you can read about the documentation. We can put the documentation in the chat. Gives you tons of capabilities to import one file, N files. You can create sequences if you know what those are with Descript. Basically, multiple recordings captured in the same session, time aligned so that they stay in sync. You can add different compositions. The import API has tons of flexibility. And so what we're showing is sort of like a simple babies first, like one recording in, clips out. But the sky's the limit, and the API documentation shows you what's possible with the different parameters that are there. I saw a comment on the screen for a moment that we record in Squadcast and Rooms or Descript. Even if you record in Descript, those tools are fine, right? Like, if you are going to record something with humans, you still have to like there's still the human performance that needs to happen. And I think the automation, what we're hoping to work towards in the future is giving you things like webhooks where you can listen for certain events that happen in the Descript ecosystem, like a recording finished uploading or a publish finished. And once those are there, they're not there now, but when they are there, it will give you better tools to say, listen for any recording that's uploaded from this folder or this workspace or whatever. And then when that happens, trigger this event. And that could be another way you could take, say, a Rooms recording and then trigger an automation to process it and so on.
Yeah. And then I think there was one more question I saw fly by in the chat around how was their B-roll, because you might have thought, hey, we're just cutting directly from the clips. But actually, and you can go back and watch episode 1 of our webinar, part of the magic of what we did through Claude and the skill we created is it not just finds the juiciest bit of the podcast episode we uploaded and are trying to create clips from, but it also knows to pull from our brand studio to use the right graphics and layouts and music, and when is tasteful to add interesting B-roll, and specifically using B-roll from our stock library so that you can upload your finished video to YouTube and you're not going to get copyrighted, because this is B-roll and music that's permissible for you to use.
And what's even cooler, there are some limitations with the formal Claude MCP connector that's like kind of in the noise. We don't need to talk about it. But if you use ChatGPT, or if you use the Descript API, or what Teddy will show in a moment, a Zapier demo, you can create your own B-roll. You can generate images or videos for your own B-roll. And that's what I'll show a demo in a little bit. I've done, and I think you can basically, you don't have to worry about copyright concerns because you're making your own imagery. And a hand wavy prompt that you would obviously do better than this, but that can help to find and create B-roll like that would be something like insert B-roll throughout the script in moments where there's something that could be like visually portrayed nicely. Generate images in a style of graphic novel or something, like whatever you want. Descript has a bunch of styles, and you can also describe your own. And use Ken Burns effect or something like that, right? Descript has tons of tools for image generation, video generation, and you can even stitch together different scenes of the two or transitions like that to give a ton of like custom, nice appeal to your video, give it the style that you want, and all of that can be prompted from afar. All right, should we show automation 2?
Yes.
While Teddy
Is
pulls up-
it Zap time?
Zap time. All
Zap
right.
time. Okay.
Hold on here. While Teddy pulls up Zapier, I want to say Claude scheduled tasks are great when there's a sort of like scheduled, inferred, sort of like fuzzy criteria for what it would take to start the demo. Oh, here an echo. I'll stop talking. Go for it, Teddy.
So, just like Sam was doing with his Claude skill, let's imagine that Laura, our CEO, gets invited to many podcasts, and at the end of the podcast, they often will send us a press kit, which includes audio files or video files of the recording of the podcast so that we can create our own clips based on Laura's podcast interview. So let's say for our team, we like to store these in this Google Drive folder right here. And then we're going to use a tool called Zapier. Or feel free to shout out in the chat if you've used it before. That will let me automate making clips out of these raw files from Google that I have in my Google Drive over here. So if we go over to Zapier, I have what's called a Zap. And the idea here is I've got a sequence of steps that start with a trigger to start the action, and then it flows through this easy workflow of simple steps and ends with a Slack message being posted in that team Slack that Sam mentioned, where his Claude workflow also posted to, at the end of the day, first pull from Google Drive, then it'll use Descript API to import that podcast interview into Descript, create some clips using that prompt we refined in webinar 1, and then post to Slack, letting me and other members on the team know, hey, there's a social media clip ready for you to review, so that we can see, do we want any tweaks? Does this look good? And can we send it out, or do we want to do some additional edits to it? So if we look at this a little bit closer, this first step, it triggers on new file in folder. So I have a folder where I can move any of these files. So if I take this one and I select organize and move, and then I'll see Laura interviews. And if I move it to this specific folder, Laura interviews Zap, that'll trigger my Zap over here. So I'm going to move this interview over. And so what's going to happen then is when Zapier detects that file has dropped into that Google Drive folder, it's first going to run through this filter step, which just checks that it's the right kind of file to upload into Descript, that it's a video file instead of, say, like a GIF or a PDF. And then it's going to import that into Descript. And it's going to import that into Descript and create a new project for it as well. And from that new project, once the file has been imported, it's going to edit the project using my prompt that I specified in webinar 1. And then it'll send it to my Slack channel at the end to say, ding, 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 you've got something ready to review. So if we want to, we can, oops. Okay. So if you want to look a little bit closer at what the configuration steps here look like, here's our Google Drive setup where we say new file in folder, configure, Laura interviews where it's pulling from. And then I can actually test with a file that it just pulled from Zapier recently. And then here's our filter step where you can see we're filtering by the file type over here. And I can similarly, one thing that's nice about Zapier and that I like it is that it's easy for me to test every step of the way versus with the Claude option, you kind of test all the way at the very end. And so it's really up to your own comfort. Because, for example, Claude requires less configuration than you might see here in Zapier, but Zapier lets you test along the way. So it's really up to you. And that's kind of the beauty of the MCP and the API as well, is you can take it to whatever tool you want to use and figure out what works best for your workflow. So we can see that Zapier was able to detect that I imported something into Descript. And so from here, now I'm going to change my app to Descript and my action event to edit project with AI. And that's where you'll see we put in our prompt from webinar 1. So this is exactly the same prompt that Sam had in Claude. We're just using it in Zapier because for my workflow purposes, Zapier is what suits me better. And so similarly, I can test every step along the way that I want to. And then at the very end, I have my Slack step, which sends a message to a Slack channel of my choice. And it says, clips from this interview are cooking. Check them out in this Slack channel. And it sends them as a bot too. So that way I know that this is automated and my coworkers don't get confused on like, is this actually Teddy or is this a bot? Which I know happens a lot in my workplace now that we're in the age of AI and bots everywhere. And you can see that in my previous test of Zapier, this all looked great. So to show you how the baked cake at the end looks, because if I were to run through this live, sometimes it takes a few minutes for the import and for the clips to be created. We can go over here to my Descript drive where you can see this is the clip I created with my Zapier workflow. So here's a composition. That's the rough cut. This is the full cut, the full podcast interview. And then, and then over here, you can see we've got our clips. So if I'm going to mute myself really quickly so that we can play it and you can hear what this clip looks like.
So this got everyone talking about, like, should PMs be building features now? Like, is that the job of the PM? And I think where most PMs got is like, no, this is not the PM job. This feels very low leverage because it essentially, you know, for me to actually create the right version of this is going to take so much more time than it would take putting any engineer on. And it's like, yes, it's fun for me because I could never have done this before, but this can't be the thing that's best and most efficient for the company. It's just like all PMs are engineers. It's like, okay, is that the right use of the context that PMs hold in their brains and their special skills? And is that kind of the right use of AI? Is that what the job of AI was?
Okay, so that's the clip that was created for me through Zapier. And similar to the ones created with Claude, you can see that we're using the branded media. We're using our branded audio right now. And actually, too, we've generated some stock images here and also, or generated some images in B-roll to use in the clip as well. But part of the reason why it's helpful to have these kinds of workflows still have a human touch at the end is you might have noticed in this last scene where we have Laura talking with the podcast host, their faces are both off screen. So, you know, that's something that a human editor should still look at and catch and say, you know, that's something we should tweak because we don't want to publish this with like half of the faces cut off. But Underlord through Zapier has already done 90% of the work, the hard part for me, of selecting the juicy clip, formatting it in a way that works with our social media guidelines, and adding all of our desired brand media and layouts. And overall, this is actually a pretty good clip. It just needs that one little twist.
And like, I'm sure you could look at this clip and be like, that looks like crap. Like I would never shoot, like that's not my... I don't think we're here to debate like the style or aesthetic of like what you want. This is simply an example of a prompt that we refined last week, and the link to the sessions there of just like an example of a clip that we make. And you assuredly will make different choices about what looks good to you, what styling, what captions, what edits, what trims, what cuts, all right? Like the aesthetic, your craft of what makes whatever you want to create. That's the whole reason you, the human, are in the loop. Mm-hmm. And what we're trying to show is that with instructions that you can give, Claude or Zapier orchestrating with Underlord can use your guidance and your instructions to assemble these edits for you at scale. So what Teddy showed and what I showed are both two totally reasonable examples of how with editing instructions in hand, like we made in episode 1, you can use either Claude or Zapier, and there's a bunch of tools we didn't show, to basically wait for new recordings, and when they land in a certain folder, take that, run those edits against them, and then send a message in Slack or email or literally whatever. Both of these tools have a bunch of different ways you can say like, okay, I'm done. Some sort of like termination message to let you know, okay, your clips are ready to review. Take a gander, and then you can decide, oh yeah, clip 2 kind of lame, clip 1 and 3 they're good. I'll make a little bit of tweaks, and then they're ready to publish.
Exactly. And again, I know we've said this before, but think of Claude and Underlord as like your overeager, happy interns, you know? They're going to do a great job and the very best job they can, but you're still the boss. You're still the one who gets the final say on what's good enough. You get to work with them to say, hey, you're 90% of the way there, but let's make these final tweaks. Or also sometimes if you're like, okay, Claude got 90% of the way there, but it's easier for me to just do that, apply that Ken Burns animation by hand than to tell Underlord to do it sometimes, you can still do that, you know? The goal of automation is to make your life easier, not to like lock you out of editing entirely and make you completely reliant on whether or not the computer decides what makes a good clip.
Totally. And like, this is a good question from Blue Veil Wellness. Can I schedule clips to be directly sent to and published to social media platforms when they're approved? Right now, there aren't any direct tools that Descript has, though there isn't any reason why you couldn't create this sort of pipeline yourself with your automation tools of choice. Descript does not have any formal integrations. It doesn't have any formal workflows for content in review or approved. It's something that we should look at. So right now, these just appear as projects that were created. We expect and hope that humans are in the loop to make sure that your quality bar is met. We do have some publish integrations with tools like YouTube. I don't know how well they could be automated, but right now, I would say in general, there aren't any direct automations to publish directly to social media. And I think probably for the better, just to make sure that you're happy with the quality first. But I imagine our integrations to let you publish to certain places, and not just social media outlets, but probably social media management tools as well, is on the horizon.
Yes.
How would you fix the phrase framing issue here? Okay, this is a great question. Something we haven't been asked about yet, but I'm kind of surprised maybe it's in the comments buried somewhere, is like, hey, which model should I choose? Like, burn through all my credits. The questions like these.
Yes.
When I was refining this prompt, originally I didn't give much instruction on like how to zoom into the right face. I basically just said like, Laura, our CEO, is going to be talking in these quotes. Find quotes of her and zoom into her. And it like generated some kind of weird outputs depending on the model that it was selecting. I think if you were to pick a better model, and by model I mean like Sonnet or Opus or, you know, I don't know the ChatGPT ones, but like they tend to have different levels of capability in terms of looking at media and understanding what's going on. That isn't to say like a model selection is the way that you would solve this problem. I think it could be an input. And then the other input I would say is in prompt, like attempt to understand what's in the video, attempt to identify who's speaking. And I'm looking for specific quotes of Laura, and it may not know who Laura is by prompt alone, but did in episode 1 that I think could help you solve this would say, okay, I basically try the best prompt that you can come up with, have Underlord execute the edits, and then review things and say, okay, like in this example, I would maybe refine the prompt and say, in one of these scenes, we didn't fully like focus on Laura only in frame. In the future, try to spot cases where multiple faces are on screen and do your best to center the view where Laura's face, Laura's, you know, like like Laura is the center of the frame, you know. So basically try to describe it in so many words and see if your description or a prompt refined version of your description could get there.
Yes, exactly. Ooh, there's a little bit of echo. Is the echo gone?
I think it was you're sharing system audio. Maybe we tried to turn the screen share audio down. Yeah, that should be good. Okay, let's see. What other questions do we have? Are there any other aspects of the demo that we didn't cover, Teddy? Oh, one thing I'll say, I don't know if it came up it sort of came up in some other questions. We, yes, we can share the skills. I'm happy to share the prompt that we did for Laura's scripts. Again, this is like our prompt we made for this very specific and fake scenario, not fake scenario, but like, you know what I mean? This canned scenario for this webinar. So do not expect the prompt that we made for our purposes to be like perfectly fit to you, but I think as an exemplar prompt in terms of like the things it specifies, how much detail it goes into, the overall structure, I think it's a great example. And then the skills repo, which you can see as a QR code, up on screen, is a great example of a small but thoughtful set of prompts that we've collected and published, which, by the way, you are encouraged to contribute to. It's just a GitHub repo. You can, if you've got great prompts, and if you're savvy with GitHub, you can submit your own prompts and we'll add them to our skills repo. These are just, again, great examples of prompts that do a thing, and I would encourage everyone to look at them, be inspired by them, but not necessarily just copy paste them, because you're going to want your own flair, your own thoughts, you know?
Yes, exactly.
A question came up earlier I just want to speak to. Teddy's demo showed the Zapier integration, and Teddy showed importing media and editing media. And right now, those are the only two Descript capabilities that our Zapier integration supports. But the Descript API has a lot of other functions. You can publish projects and generate a share link. You can export a transcript. You can do a bunch of other stuff. There's a help center guide that we're working on, and we'll publish it, where it shows you how you can use tools like Zapier, or frankly, any tools like N8N, that we don't have a formal integration, and actually make raw API calls so that you can trigger any capability of the Descript API, even if our integration doesn't support it. If what I said just sounded like mumbo jumbo to you, don't worry about it. But if it made sense to you, know that we'll get a help center article published so that you can see how to exercise for API endpoints, even if Zapier integration doesn't support it, or if you work in another tool where we don't have an integration like that.
We have a great question here from Randall Echeverria. Can we set it up to work for multiple different clients?
Multiple different clients. Do you know what they mean by this, Teddy? I want to make sure I understand the context.
I think I'm going to interpret this as meaning multiple different AI tools, in which case, you know, anything that you can connect the Descript MCP to, you can use these similar prompts for. It really, the goal is to bring Descript to you wherever you are. And I see our wonderful support staff has just posted in the chat as well a link with a guide to connecting to any client to unblock you there so that you can do that whenever you want.
Okay, I see Randall's clarifying in the thread. I think what they meant was different branding. So, like, let's say you're a creative agency and you work with companies A, B, and C, and they each have their own brands, and they each have their own styles, and they each have their own whatevers. Short answer is yes, you can. I think what we talked about in episode 1 and what we'll echo here is that using Claude or ChatGPT to use Descript remotely doesn't really add new capabilities to Descript necessarily, but it changes the usage mode where you can interact with Descript. And also, there are a lot of Descript features. The more that you use them and set them up, the more capable Descript is at creating content that looks brand aligned or follows your style guidelines. And it makes usage from tools like the MCP or any like remote calling that much more capable. So say you were a creative agency, and say you had 3 clients, A, B, and C, and say you wanted to make videos for client A and B and C that each looked and felt like their own branded content. A great example of how you might achieve that in Descript today would be in Descript proper, first, the app, maybe creating layout packs, or you know, having media in your media library that's clearly labeled as like brand A's layout pack, brand A's media, and so forth for brand C and B and C. And then when you're using Claude or ChatGPT or however you're orchestrating your edits, if you're just explicitly in the prompt saying, for this video, use brand A's intro sequence and use brand A's layout pack for social clips or whatever, that should quickly and effectively take all of the work you've put into layout packs. If you don't know what layout packs are, it's basically like a slide template for Descript videos. Using those in the right places, letting you achieve different branding styles and flares, all from orchestrating them within, you know, Claude or whatever. But the precursor, the prerequisite there is creating those layout packs, having that shared media defined and able to be found by an AI agent by like proper labeling.
Yes. And one last thing before we get to Alpha Chimp, for example, if you really like Claude Cowork actually lets you define projects, and within those projects, you can have files uploaded. So for example, if you have different brand kits for your different clients, you can keep everything in different little localized projects, but your Claude skill can be used in any of those projects. So just a thought there.
To get to Alpha Chip's question, can you automate adding a branded end card or opening? Yes, definitely.
That is like the ideal use case for like automation.
Exactly. Chapter 1. And I think you can honestly say something like this, like to every video, add a branded intro card and outro card. And if you just said that and nothing more, you'd probably get some generic thing. It'd just be a scene on either end of a video with whatever. But to make this very powerful, what I would do is if you have a logo or logos, I would upload those to your Descript media library. In fact, let me just open that now. And you notice we're talking a lot about doing things in Descript and not just doing things drive view. The media library is a place in Descript where you can add media like images, logos, videos, sounds, whatever. And once they are there, they're accessible not only when you use Descript, but when you use Underlord, either in-app or remotely via the MCP. So to add branded intro and outro cards, what I would do is I would add the logos or any assets that are branded. I would probably create layout packs too. And if you're not familiar with what a layout pack is, it is basically a customized set of slide templates for videos. So you can define one time what you want each intro or talking head, lower third, whatever to look like, and then recall that quickly. And so I'd probably have an intro and an outro card for my brand with logos and everything. And then in prompt say, yes, apply my branded intro and outro card from my layout pack, whatever. And that would be a great way to accomplish that.
Okay, and then we have a great question from Rice Revenue on, so are there standard prompts I can create for Underlord to edit my raw videos?
Yes, definitely. I think, like, okay, I'm going to answer a meta question here first, and then I'll answer the direct question. I'm imagining, based on the questions that we see, it's probably quite daunting. Like, what even prompt do I start with? Can you share with me your prompt? I want some guidance. And I totally appreciate that. It's like hard to even know where to begin. A solution that we have for this in Descript, and I'll just pull my good old screen right back up again. What we have in Descript to answer this question are prompt templates. Think of this as basically pre-canned prompts that we've refined and tested with Underlord that work well to do a number of different things. The sort of caveat I said earlier, and I'll reiterate it here, think of these as like a starting point, not the holy grail silver bullet that's going to solve all your problems and like cure world hunger. So depending on Rice Revenue and depending on your needs, if you have a rough cut of a podcast that you're trying to create, or if you want to translate and dub a video, I would review these prompt templates as good like Underlord prompts to start with. Any of these, what you can do, you can sort of like open these up. The prompt is written here. But what I do, and what I think the real secret shot here is to take this prompt, copy, and then go over to your dear friend, AI assistant, whoever that might be, and say, I'm trying to refine a Descript prompt. And then describe in loose terms whatever you want to do, and then paste our starter prompt as an example of something that is a Descript sanctioned prompt that feels like it does a thing. And then based on this prompt and its structure, and your guidance and your goals, you can ask, say, Claude to be like, hey, refactor this prompt for me such that it like does this thing differently or meets my needs or whatever. Basically, the best tool to create prompts is an AI agent. And the more context you give it, the closer presumably it will get to like achieving your end goals. But like these aren't things you should go into a cave with like a stone and a sharp stick and like carve out carefully, right? These are very easy for AI tools to create and iterate on. And it's like pretty quick to test them too. And you can iterate over and over.
Yeah, and I also just want to add on that point too that you might wonder, how does my preferred AI assistant of choice even know what Descript is or all the capabilities Descript has to offer? That is a common question we get, and you don't need to worry about it actually, because since your favorite AI tools can search the internet, they can find all the wonderful documentation, both for the API itself and also documentation created by our support team, not just on Descript's actual features, but pro tips and best use cases and practices, and leverage all that info for you.
You said pro tips, and my ears perked up, Teddy. So I feel like that's a good segues. We have about 5 or 6 minutes left. So I wanted to take a beat here and just, these are not things that are going to be written in the Help Center. They're just like advice and things we've learned using these tools ourselves and talking to customers. I'll read these quickly. Teddy, I'd love to know if you've got color commentary to add. It is tempting, or I think it's an easy trap I've fallen into, to like try to automate something. It's hard to connect this service to that service or whatever. And I'm like, screw this, I give up. I can't fully automate things end to end. To that, I would say any automation is better than none. Many of you might be working in teams with complicated things to store your media and like weird approvals to get things up and running. But if you've got more content to make than time to make it, and you can automate any part of the process to make more than you otherwise would have made without said automation, then you're already creating value. You're already like getting ahead. And sometimes this kind of points to the next pro tip: a spark ignites the fire. Like maybe your boss or your team is like, I don't know, your automation skeptics, or like, I don't know if we want to invest in these tools. That seems like a whole lot of work. I think one of the best ways I've seen customers I've worked with generate internal alignment and excitement around the promise of automation is by doing one thing one time, showing the simplest automation, even just taking a recording and making, editing it, or applying some transforms, or turning a blog article into a video. If you can show that that's possible once, then you can say automation can take this from what maybe seems like a parlor trick into a standard practice for every blog that we make, or every recording that we make. And I think that it can help to open eyes to the potential of tools like Descript and automation tooling, and also just like help you make a better case for why investing in these sorts of tools is like worth the squeeze, there's like so many ways to automate things. So this match your tooling to your process is mostly just like, don't feel like you got to use Zapier. Like Sam and Teddy said Zapier, so Zapier is what, no, definitely not. Every tool is going to have its strengths and weaknesses. Do some research to figure out like why people who use this tool use it and what they hate and love about it. And then like pick like if you already have if you already are an N8N house, do N8N. If you already are deep into Claude, like go schedule tasks. They're all going to have their shortcomings, and it's good to be clear-eyed that like there isn't one true way to do it. And the last one is like, I know the whole premise of this talk was about automation, right? Like humans out of the loop, but very, very much, especially in a creative space, I imagine humans will stay in the loop for quite some time, especially when it comes to just like not making slop, right? Even the skill that Teddy and I created last week that took podcast recordings and turned them into clips, it works pretty well. It's imperfect. We saw an imperfection today. And I think over time, as you start to see, especially when you see an automation creating content at scale, you'll start to see fractures in the prompt logic or opportunities to improve it. Expect that. That's a feature, not a bug. You don't build an assembly line to make chapstick tubes and then just like never touch it again. There's like a guy with like a wrench and little like greasy squeezy bottles that like fix things, right? Like the same is true for content pipeline automations. It's just the maintenance looks different. But go in expecting there to be maintenance, and that's what's going to keep your quality bar high. Teddy, any other pro tips you'd want to add?
I think I just really want to emphasize too that the goal of automation, knowing that humans stay in the loop, is that you're still winning time back. This 3-hour-long podcast that Laura did, that we used Claude and Zapier to cut into nice clips, that's 3 hours of each of our time saved of having to literally scrub through the podcast, clip each clip we want, That's like very quickly the savings of automation add up in that way, even if at the end you still want to make sure and you go review the final output and spend 10 to 15 minutes just refining whatever your AI tool of choice has created.
Yeah, that sounds really nicely to like when the work can be described concisely. Sometimes the biggest value is just like kicking it off and letting it run in the background rather than like having to start it yourself. And that's a promise that the MCP delivers even without automation. But with automation too, you can just really scale how much you can benefit from remote triggering of workflows like that.
And I think too, like because of that, it also enables you to be more creative and experimental in some ways, because you can kick off automated flows. For example, like I could take that Laura podcast and I could say, cut it for a LinkedIn, give me 3 cuts for a LinkedIn audience, give me 3 cuts for a YouTube audience, 3 cuts for a TikTok audience, knowing that those platforms have different audiences and different styles and stuff. And then the idea is I get to come to the end and pick the cream of the crop.
We covered so much today, and I see a ton of questions and stuff going on in the chat. I want to thank Teddy so much for co-hosting this webinar with me. I want to thank Gabe and Alex, our behind-the-scenes support crew. And I want to thank all of you. I think we're in like a wild time right now with the way these tools, the speed these tools are evolving, and video is such an integral part of so many industries and so many workflows. So I think if you take one thing away from this webinar, I would hope that you take away whatever your ambitions are with video or with content. It's likely more possible to achieve the scale and the quality of what you want to accomplish with the tools that exist today. And I'm not just saying Descript, right? Just like the tools in general, than you might think it might be. And I would encourage you to try and follow along with some of the demos that we built. See if you can build one simple demo. Start small, even if these tools seem daunting or complicated. Because I think what you'll be surprised to find is like not only are the tools simpler than they might seem, but it's like tremendously like the capabilities that you have with the tooling now are just like they far outpace I think my grasp, most of ours grasp. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is just get started. So thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate everyone being here. If you want to learn more, we've got a bunch of different resources, a company office, our community office hours that we host weekly, our support staff, our top tier. They're the very best and they're incredibly helpful. So please reach out if you have any questions. Teddy, any closing thoughts?
None other than you forgot to thank one person, which is yourself, Sam. Everybody, please give Sam a round of applause in the chat.
Be weird to be like, and I'd like to thank myself for being so excellent, and my parents. And no, okay, yeah, you're right.
But you still deserve the praise.
Cheers, Teddy. Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
I don't have a mic, I don't have lights, I don't even have a camera. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna sound so dumb. Descript will take care of it for you. I'm not gonna do it. You're the only person who can make reinsurance interesting. Well, on video, I look like a freak. Just hit record and Descript will do the rest. All right, I'll do it. Here we go. In today's world, what doesn't affect your
understanding the impact can be difficult. The reinsurance world is built on understanding, predicting, and managing risk on a global level. It's the most powerful predictive system on Earth.
Sweet.